Summer is winding down and I'm getting ready to actually pull some of these plants. So let's review all of the varieties that I grew this year. Let's start with my paste tomatoes. I grew one Roma tomato and one, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Napoli tomato. I grew these exact varieties last year and they did amazing. I got so many pounds of tomatoes. I started giving them away because it was just so overwhelming. They were a complete flop this year. I put them in a different bed and I'm wondering if they didn't get the right amount of sunlight. I honestly have no idea. I think I've gotten like 5 tomatoes off these plants. So I'm going to try some different varieties next year and I'm also going to put them in a different bed. I grew a sweetheart cherry on my trellis and these are so cute. They actually do look like little hearts and there's a ton of foliage, but there's a ton of blossom drop on this particular plant. So you can see all of this. These were all blossoms that dropped. But towards the end of the season, this absolutely exploded. There are so many tomatoes on here. They're really small. I would say they're on the smaller side of a cherry tomato, but they're so cute. They taste good and they look really good on a salad. And I put this in a food mill and I also use it to make sauce. All right, let's move on to my tomatillos. I put in 2 plants and this was my first year growing them and they did awesome. Check out this huge one right here. They did so well. It was kind of a slow start and I wasn't really sure how it was gonna go and I definitely didn't stake this correctly. Like they did not grow up the trellis that I have there. They grew more out like a mini bonsai tree and I put individual stakes like that one to hold up the different branches just like this. But I've made so much salsa verde and I've also made some roasted chili verde sauce. So that is awesome as a marinade and I've gotten so many tomatillos from just 2 plants. I'm definitely going to have to grow this next year. Let's move on to the onion bed. So it's looking a little sparse because I've already picked a handful out. I've been picking them as I've been making salsas, but honestly, overall, I want to call this like a semi-failure. A lot of the onions like this didn't get much bigger than when I put them in the ground. That was number 10. I'm not growing number 10 again. I need to look at my list and see what 10 was because that one did the worst. The other 2 varieties did better. And this is like an average size. This one's pretty big that I'm pointing to right here. And I got a couple that were about that size. I put 3 different varieties in on purpose so I could see which ones would do best because I've been really struggling with onions. I planted Armenian cucumber on this trellis and it went absolutely berserk. I was not expecting it to get this crazy. Honestly, it was really beautiful at first, but then it kind of turned into a crazy jungle and the cucumbers were fun to eat at first, but I was so overwhelmed with them. I stopped picking them and we just could not eat them. It was too many cucumbers. I'm not going to grow this again. It was just way too much, but it was fun to grow and experiment with it this year. On the other side of the trellis, I have loofah. I was not sure how well this would grow, but it absolutely took off. Utah summers are hot and loofah likes heat. The other thing I was worried about was the length of the season. So it's looking like I have a number of mature loofah, so I'm hoping they'll dry out correctly, but I actually have maybe over a dozen on here, so it's super cool. The cucumbers were also a slow start, but they also took over, and this is what they look like. And now I'm done picking them. That's why there's a bunch of overripe ones on here. I planted National Pickling, which they do really well here, but they also get bitter kind of quickly. So I'm going to try a few different varieties next year to see if I can find one that doesn't get bitter so quickly. It's tough in Utah because cucumbers are sensitive, but it gets hot so quickly here. So there's a really short season for them. I tried planting some green beans on the other side of this A-frame trellis and in the four corners of this garden bed. I planted four different varieties, and the only one where all of them came up was this Landreth green bean. All four of them came up. Of course, I had to cut back three of them. And then I also got this Roma green bean that came up eventually, but it did take a long time. But none of the other varieties came up at all. So next year, I'm going to plant more of the Landreth green bean. Over here, I have four other varieties of tomatoes. On this side of the arched trellis, I planted Dr. Carolyn tomato. This has gone off like crazy in the past for me, and this year it was a complete failure. And it's really sad because this tomato tastes really good. It's like candy, it's so sweet, but I have no idea what happened. It just did not take off. Over here, I have what I thought was Moscow, Idaho tomato. It was supposed to be, it's a larger tomato. It's supposed to be a tomato I use for making sauce, for canning. I think I used saved seed, and I have no idea what happened, but this is much smaller than I was expecting. It's about half to a third of the size of the Moscow, Idaho tomatoes I got last year. So I'm kind of wondering if it's a hybrid tomato or something weird happened. I'm not going to save seed from this tomato this year because I'm not sure that it's really Moscow, Idaho. And on this side, I put an Abe Lincoln tomato in. I actually think these are Abe Lincolns. These are the size that I was expecting. Both of these varieties I planted last year. So I didn't really experiment at all, actually, with my larger tomatoes this year, but I definitely am going to next year. On this arch trellis, I have German lunchbox. It's kind of like a grape tomato. This did really well for me last year, so I figured I would do it again. And actually, I was planning on originally cutting back on my cherry tomatoes. So I actually wasn't going to have this in, but I got a free seed to put on the other side of the trellis, and something had to go here. I have one other tomato variety, and this is the Woolly Kate tomato. This was my free seed from Breaker Creek. This was really interesting. The leaves, they're fuzzy, and the tomatoes themselves are also a little bit fuzzy, kind of like a peach. This was also a slow start, just like everything else, but there was a lot of foliage on this plant in the beginning of the season and absolutely no tomatoes. But towards the second half and towards the end of the season, this absolutely exploded. Look how pretty this is. It is such cool coloring, the yellow and purple, and the size varies from like a small cherry tomato to a larger one like this. This is larger than a golf ball and on the same size as some of my Abe Lincolns. So really, really cool tomato. I have been making the honey tomato butter out of the Ball canning book, and it's super good. It's sweet, and yeah, I'm not sure that I'll plant this one again, but this was a really cool variety to experiment with this year. This is my pepper bed. So I have both my hot peppers and my sweet peppers. My tomato plant is kind of shadow, casting a shadow over these plants, and I think that's why these two plants in the front didn't grow very large and I didn't get a lot of peppers off them. But the two in the front were my grande jalapenos, and back here is my tam jalapeno. I actually got a lot of jalapenos off that back one. This is the chocolate pepper. I'm really surprised this did well. I got a handful of peppers off this plant. I've tried growing this the past few years and I never got anything to even germinate, let alone actually get peppers off of them. These are Corbaci peppers, and they're so cool looking, and honestly they do so well here, and they ripen really early in the season. I was picking these back in July. From like an efficiency standpoint, obviously it's not a lot of meat on the pepper, there's not a lot there, but there's so many of them, and they're just so cool looking and fun. I really like having them in my garden. These are lipstick peppers. I have a couple of these. These do pretty good. I think this first plant didn't give me as many as the other plants in the back, but these turn into a really pretty red pepper. They're smaller than most bell peppers, but they just do so well. So I planted 3 of them, I think, this year. Here, these are my canary bell peppers. I have 3 of them. This is my first year growing them. They took longer to ripen than I was expecting. They have some sun scald here, which is kind of a bummer. But these turn orange. The pictures show them being like a yellow bell pepper, but mine were orange. But I've gotten several of these this year. They're huge, they're dense, and I'm definitely going to grow this again next year because they did really, really well. My hope for this arch trellis was to grow the butterfly pea plant on both sides, and they did not germinate. They just now germinated after being in the ground for like 5 months. Okay, maybe like 4 months. I don't know why. I don't know if the soil temperature wasn't correct or the right moisture level, but they just now sprouted, and I did not get the trellis of butterfly pea plants that I was hoping to. So I was kind of sad to have this empty trellis. But this bed is my herbs and cut flowers. I sprinkled cut flowers all over this half of the garden bed, and this is all I got. These are salmon zinnias. I did get several. I was able to cut several of them and bring them inside, which is awesome, but I am disappointed that I didn't get the cut flower garden that I was envisioning. I don't know why, but just nothing else germinated. So I'm not sure if there's something going on with my soil. I planted herbs on this side. My cilantro already bolted and it's now coriander. And my dill, same thing. There's dill seeds here that I'm going to pick. I did get the chance to cut some flower heads off and use it in my dill pickles for canning. And here's the coriander. And yeah, everything bolted, but my plan is to actually rip all this out soon, and I'm going to put lettuce and spinach in this bed. These are my melons and zucchini. So I'm able to get a lot in this bed because I put the melons on the edges and then I just let them hang and drape off the edges. The zucchini went crazy just like it always does. This is why you need to give it plenty of space. I have picked so many zucchinis. We've eaten zucchini every night with dinner during the summer. Some of them are starting to get ahead of me, but yeah, this plant always goes nuts. And then those are my 4 melons. I planted Golden Jenny, which was new to me. This was the first time I planted it, and Midget Melon, which I've planted for the past few years. Both of them did so well. Again, it was a slow start. It really, putting them in the ground, it seems like it cost a few weeks. It did set them back a little bit. But then they took off. I have like dozens of melons on here, and they taste really good. The Golden Jenny especially tastes, it tastes kind of different from any melon I've ever eaten before. It's a really unique flavor, and I definitely want to grow it next year, although I might have to cut back to 2 plants because I got so many melons. I couldn't keep up with it. My husband doesn't really like cantaloupe, so eating all of this by myself was, it's kind of difficult. But look at these. They're so cute. And they have a really interesting shape. These are the Golden Jennies. They have kind of a weird bottom shape, but that's how I can tell them apart. They look like this. But yeah, super cute. Really love them. They're doing so well. This is the last thing that I grew in my garden, and it is huckleberry. I thought this would be a really fun experiment. Here's one right here. I'm also going to call this a failure. So the plants did not get very big. I only got a few huckleberries here and there. And honestly, I didn't love the way they tasted. If I got enough, I probably would have tried to make a jam, but I would have needed way more than what I got. They're so tiny. But yeah, I'm not going to grow this again. It was a fun experiment to see what it would be like, but I just won't do that again. So anyways, that was everything in my garden for this year. I definitely have some ideas for what I want to do differently, different varieties that I want to try, and I also have some varieties that I need to make sure that I keep growing again next year. So thank you so much for joining me on my garden tour and variety review.